Okay, welcome to the Sprint 23 demo. Number of things got done this sprint, but it was mostly focused on stabilization. So next slide, please. So I'll give the sprint statistics. Greg and Jason will talk about the providers. Dan's going to give us an update on the UI. Greg is going to give us an update on Foreman, Orchestration, and Automate. Joe's going to give us an update on the Appliance. Jason's going to talk about some other important fixes. Rich is going to talk about Fleecing. And John Mark's going to give us an update on the community. Next slide. All right, so 165 pull requests were merged this sprint. Of them, over 100 were bugs. So, it kind of shows that it truly has been a stabilization sprint. During the sprint, we released Bitvinik release candidate 3. Jason will give us statistics on that, but there was kind of stuff going into that. 44 issues were enhancements, and kind of the rest there were sprinkling of technical debt, refactoring, and tests. Next slide, please. Over to Greg on the providers.
All right. So there were 40 pull requests merged, or over 40 pull requests merged in the provider integration space for Sprint 23. And as Oleg pointed out, most of them were focused on stabilization and bug fixes. But despite this release not being as feature-rich as others, there's still a number of highlights I want to mention. One of the improvements that made it into Sprint 23 deals with handling the provider power states from our cloud providers a little better. Specifically, we're now doing a better job at showing the power states of OpenStack and Amazon. So with OpenStack, we can show paused rebooting, when the instance is rebooting and when it's waiting to launch. And with Amazon, we can show when it's powering down or powering up. Now, obviously, this is still tied into how we capture events. So if we don't have, if it still falls into that window of when the event comes in and whether we can actually get the event in time to show that an instance is rebooting or powering up. Another exciting change that came in is we're now capturing events from the OpenStack Undercloud. This means we can react to changes that are happening in the infrastructure layer of OpenStack. And we've also added support for another new Amazon Web Service instance type, the G2 8 extra large instance type. It's uniquely designed to handle large graphics processing workloads. It'll be interesting to see how people use that. Next slide, please. So one of the more exciting changes for Sprint 23 in the provider space was added by our friends over in the OpenStack integration team. So ManageIQ can now show the status of various OpenStack services. If you see in the bottom right-hand corner there, it's a little blurry, but I personally have been looking for something like this for a long time. It's really nice to see all the different services in OpenStack and the status. I think it adds a huge value to our integration with OpenStack. And that's it on the providers front. Over to Dan to talk about UI. Next slide.
All right. Thanks, Greg. So we've added some feature in two areas of the user interface. One is in OpenStack Terminology, and that's where the introduction of OpenStack, there's some objects in there that are actually modeled the same as clusters and hosts. But in OpenStack terms, they're called deployment roles and nodes. So what we've done is added some logic to the UI to kind of show them properly, and when both exist, to show that properly as well. So I've got some screenshots of that. And then we were able to squeeze in some enhancements to the Foreman backend, and the UI then is showing some of those as well. So I have some screenshots of those. And next slide. So here you've got deployment roles, and basically, if you notice that's under infrastructure, it's in the same place that where clusters normally is. So if all you have is OpenStack, the only providers that you've set up are OpenStack, you will see them as deployment roles. Next slide. However, if you have other providers, VMware, Microsoft, whatever, you'll start seeing clusters and deployment roles together on the same screen. Right, next. Okay, so again, this is the nodes. If you've got OpenStack only, you'll see just the nodes under OpenStack. And then go to the next slide. We'll see where we have other providers as well. So there it's a little more clear with those quad icons. You can see the OpenStack Red Hat little quadrants, as well as the other ones are right next to them. Let's see, so, and next. When you actually drill into one of these objects, everything will be, the text will be more context sensitive to what type of object it is there. So it's hard to see, but you can see down there, it says that hover text says show this node's deployment role. In fact, that even shows deployment role there instead of cluster. Those are all changes. And it's should be pervasive throughout the UI, even in settings and things like that, where depending on which providers you have defined or discovered in your environment, it'll be showing the proper text. Next. So in Foreman, we've updated several of the screens. We've added more columns to the providers list view. I'm just kind of walking down the tree here. Next screen should show the actual profiles. So we've added some columns in there as well. So what's happened is the backend is collecting more information. I think Greg might be talking about that, but we're adding more columns so you can see more details. Next slide. We get to the configuration profile, and it used to have just barely anything there. You can see there are some empty fields there. That's just our sample database doesn't have them filled in, but if you have a live database, you will see more information in some of those blank areas, but definitely a more populated summary screen. Next slide. So on this configuration profile, you can also see the configured systems under there. If you notice, there's two tabs on there. Again, it's hard to see. They're small. Maybe you should have zoomed in. But you can see there's a summary tab, which shows the summary information we just saw, and as well as the children, the configured systems that are in the tree. So this is a dual screen, with multiple tabs, so you can see either information that you want to see. And next. And then down to the summary screen on the configured systems. Again, a lot more information there. On my sample, there's some blank stuff, but those will be filled in when you see them. And that's it. Next.
All right. Dan, so a lot of the information Dan was showing there was actually collected in the last sprint, and we covered some of that, or a lot of that in the last demo, so it isn't in here. But things that we did do is for provisioning, now when you select a system or multiple systems, it will filter the available configuration profiles for things like based on organization or location that the systems are in. And a lot of things that additional information got exposed through the reporting layer for Foreman as well. I see this orchestration side, one got cut off there, but so the rollback, there was a bug that came in that we fixed, and as part of that, we were able to enhance the messaging coming back to the UI, where before it would tell you that the provision failed. Now you get a message back telling you the details of what failed and why it was rolled back. And then on the inventory collection side, we're pulling in the stack name, and then the bottom part there that's cut off is the reason, status reason message. So the screenshot shows an example there where the top one failed, and it's telling you the resources that it failed on. So those are now visible in the summary screens and the list screens for those items. Next slide. All right, and a simple one for Automate, but you can now get a handle to the request object and set your own description in there. I think before we updated the user message or the last message for the column, so now we're giving the ability to set your own description for a request if needed. And I think that is it.
So on the appliance side, there were some issues that QE had noticed with memory on a lot of our worker processes, where the virtual memory was much higher than it was previously. And we tracked that down to the less Rails gem. And by default, we were using Bundler's default behavior that it would require all gems that you add to the gem file. So we found that just doing that was loading up over 500 megs of virtual memory per process. And it turned out we didn't need less Rails on our workers. We only needed it when precompiling less to CSS. And by doing a lazy require and loading it when we needed to, we could save like 500 megs of virtual memory. So that was done in this sprint. Next.
Okay, so there were a couple fixes for some long-term issues that made it into this release, or into this sprint. First one is CPU details in the UI. There were a lot of reports that chargeback wasn't working, for example. People were saying that the value should be one thing and not another, and we could never reproduce it because all the data in the database was correct. Turns out it's more of a presentation problem, and there was some confusion. So you can see here on this, I took a snap of the summary screen for this RHEL appliance that had 4 logical CPUs, but had only 1 physical CPU. So previously, we would only show 1 CPU because that was the number of sockets. The change that I made now has it blown out a little bit more in the description, so you can see how many sockets, cores per socket, and the total logical CPUs. Given that the number is now 4 instead of 1 for what is used for the math, that seems to clear up a lot of the confusion. And then down below is a screenshot of if you click that container thing, you go to the full container screen, we also put it there. There's a few other locations where that comes into play. Next slide, please. So the other part of this was we actually did find some chargeback problems. One interesting one was storage cap in U was originally collected every 120 minutes. And if you didn't collect regular cap in U, it would still create rows in the database for the storage cap in U. But since it was every 120 minutes, there was a gap left between each value. So the math didn't always work out. So the initial just kind of workaround fix is to have storage cap and you collect it every 60 minutes, so you have an hourly record for each one. Second half of the problem is when you're collecting the storage cap in you, we derive a lot of information from other sources. And at that time, we were collecting the number of CPUs available. For example, as you saw on the previous slide, it'd be like 4 logical CPUs for that RHEL box. However, if usage values were not collected for the VM, you'd get more weird math errors because you'd have nil values for usage, but then you'd have 4 available CPUs. So it sort of looked like you were using 0%, but the VM may not be running, for example, and that doesn't make sense to have charges applied to the number of CPUs available if you're not actually having the VM on. So the fix there is to not collect any of those derived values unless there's corresponding usage values as well. And that should clear up some of the math and chargeback. Next slide. On to Rich.
Okay. I guess this work wasn't technically related to fleecing. We experienced an issue where the broker appeared to be leaking various things all at the same time. And it turns out it really wasn't leaking anything. It was just a bunch of reader threads that were blocked on a writer, and they were holding resources. And it took a while. Luckily, it was reproducible on the scale of about half hour to 6 hours. So it was slow, but we had some instrumented code to plug into the blocks, and we found that it was actually hanging on a thread that joined in sleep. And so evidently there's an issue in Ruby that sleep exposes because there's a possibility of sleep raising it to one thread and that thread going on and killing the raising thread and then joining the raising thread, which causes the join to hang. So basically just a patch or a hack to sleep to prevent that situation from happening. And we haven't seen that happen since. Is that right?
Well, it's in timeout, but yes.
You said sleep?
Yeah, you said
Yeah, I'm sorry. In timeout. And that's pretty much it. I guess the root cause is in Ruby. So ultimately, the solution would be to fix the issue that's causing the the joint to hang. That's it.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. Next. Okay. John Mark?
Where'd he go?
Over to John
Sorry, I
Mark.
was on mute. I was on mute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
All right, great. So we have a lot of updates. Most importantly, we have coming up next week the ManageIQ User Day at OpenStack Summit. If you're going to OpenStack Summit, we have a day on Wednesday, May 20th in the afternoon there. As has been mentioned previously, the release candidate number 3 for Botvinnik is looking good. We're looking at a release coming up real soon now. Look for an announcement around that on the blog. And after a very tight race in the vote, the next release cycle is going to be called Capablanca. Capablanca edged out Carlson by a 7-6 vote, so it was pretty close there. We just got confirmation for room at Red Hat Summit. So if you're coming to Red Hat Summit in the week of June 22nd, we'll have another user day there at Thursday, June 25th. After the OpenStack Summit, we'll have some details and agenda around that. I'm happy to announce that the Extensions Depot version 2 is moving forward. Look for a beta and a staging area in a few weeks, hopefully by Summit, but we'll see how far we can get by then. And then finally, just to remind everyone that if you want to track what we're doing, or if you want to add comments or your own requests, we're following everything on the ManageIQ Community Trello board with a link there on the presentation.
I just want to add one thing to the Botvinnik release. Between RC2 and RC3, we pulled over 226 pull requests from the master branch, which were almost a good majority were bug fixes, and there were a handful of features that sort of required the fixes to come along. And that 226 PRs amounted to about 362 commits. So it was pretty, a lot of the stabilization that we had done on upstream came down to stabilize RC3, including that broker fix from Rich, which was killing a lot of people.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, the difference between RC2 and RC3 is pretty substantial.
Yeah, hopefully this one's stable enough and will just become the release. All right. So with that, we conclude the presentation. I turn it over to questions, if anyone, or comments. I don't see anything in blue jeans, and phone's quiet. For another minute.
Oleg, I've got a question.
Okay.
With respect to providers, I see that there have been significant enhancements towards event recognition. I'm wondering if this is also being reflected in the event filter, if someone can speak to that, or the filters that may be added to the event YAML.
Yeah. So this is Greg B. When we added, or when the OpenStack integration team added the Undercloud or added the event support for Undercloud, they also added some of the event filtering in the event handling YAML file. I think I looked. There was about 5 or 6 events that they added to it. I had the link up here just a moment ago, and I can probably look at it. I want to get one example to talk about. So things like server group.create and server group.delete are some of the events that came in. At this point, it's just doing a EMS refresh for those events, but we can continue to customize those and make them, or I guess also get down to the filtering out events that we don't want to capture as well, which we didn't add any to that list, if that's what you're asking.
That is what I'm asking, because that does turn out to be an area that's important for just operational continuity.
Yeah, I think at this point we don't necessarily know all the different events that are going to come in, so we're going to have to kind of feel that out and determine what are the more chatty, less important events, and then add those to the list.
So is there, or should there be a mechanism in place by which customers can share their events from different providers and have them have a decision made on those?
Talk.ManageIQ or open an issue on GitHub. Either one of those could be useful.
Yeah, we also have in the works this whole notion of an event switchboard, which will be coming out in the weeks and months ahead. That will try to normalize a lot of that even further. But having said that, it would be good to get from users anything that's missing from either the event switchboard, the filtering YAMLs, or whatever. That's kind of what the user community is out there for. They provide feedback. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right, so with that, I'd like to thank everyone involved for putting in all the hard work to make the sprint what it is and to get the Bitfinex release candidate out there. And looking forward to great things in the following sprints. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.